Welcome to Stereo 3D Productions and this VorpX game guide for Left 4 Dead 2. Possibly one of the easiest games to use with VorpX at this point, and a game whose gameplay simplicity suits VR perfectly. Before watching any guide in this series, we highly advise you watch the VorpX Universal Guide if you haven't already. The basics of a VorpX setup are covered end to end in that video, which serves as this series' foundation. There will be a link to the Universal Guide video at the top of the description. Know that videos in this series are open for updates. If you see the tag updated in the title of this video, it means we've created a new video demonstrating new information about the setup. If you see the tag outdated, it means we've completely redone this tutorial. In either case, if you see the tags, look for a link to the extra video or the new tutorial at the top of the description. The videos in this series all contain a table of contents in the description with timecodes. Feel free to use those to skip to any section in the video. The last 3 times I created a setup tutorial, things were a lot more complicated than this, let me tell you. It's quite refreshing to be able to get a title that works this easily with VorpX, not to mention a game that's so simple to start playing. Even if you've never seen it before, you won't have any issues whatsoever playing it straight to VR. It does have a few minor problems, most of which we'll fix, and each of which we'll be talking about. Despite being kind of awesome, this isn't the perfect VorpX title to play. Not because of any direct issues with the adaptation to VR, but rather because of pacing. Damn, this gameplay is fast. It's fast, and sometimes, even for me, it's proven disorientating. Now, excuse me if my VR tiger blood makes me nearly immune to sim sickness, but I can't guarantee everyone will get to enjoy this as much as I did, mostly because that movement is intense. Sure, you're supposed to be standing on firm ground, but by moments the motion amounts to being in an airplane doing aerobatics pretty much. That or intense figure skating with guns and a third blade. That being said, if you can handle the motion, this game is electrifying, another one of those that can make you feel superhuman. The setup is straightforward and there's only a couple of cautionary notes, so let's get on with it. First up, let's make sure VorpX is not running so we can fire up the game normally on our screen and go change a few options. Go in the game's video options. First, change aspect ratio to 4:3. From here you can pick one of 2 resolutions. 1280 by 1024 for low-end systems, say on a GTX 970 equivalent or lower, or 1400 by 1050 if you're on anything at or above a GTX 980 equivalent. Next, set display mode to windowed no border. Then, reduce film grain to the minimum value. Now, click Advanced Settings. We have 2 very important options to cover: anti-aliasing and VSync. First, this game supports MSAA, possibly the best anti-aliasing technique, but also the most costly. It's effective enough that we won't be needing any greater resolution options. For example, MSAA 4X can actually make your resolution appear twice as high as it actually is. Almost everyone will be able to use at least MSAA 2X. Even the lower end systems using 1280 by 1024, and this is enough to yield graphics almost as good as some first-party VR games. In my tests, using a GTX 1080 alongside an i7 6700K, I was able to increase this to MSAA 4X while running at 1400 by 1050, and the game still ran well and looked even sharper. I do recommend you experiment with the MSAA setting, as it goes a long way to improve image detail without actually increasing the resolution. After configuring your anti-aliasing, make sure to set Wait for Vertical Sync to Disabled. You will get image judder if you don't do that. For the rest, it's up to you. I left the remainder of the settings on default, as it seems the game had already picked the highest values anyway. Go ahead and hit done, at which point the changes we've made will take effect. You can close the game at this point. We're almost ready to load it in VR. Before you rush in there, let's disable the game's disgusting motion blur by adding a special option in your game's Steam launch parameters. The option name is so long, I'll post it on the screen, and I'll also post it in the description so you can copy paste it easily. Enter that value in the game's launch parameters as shown here. Before we go to the next step, I need to point out that we have two limitations with resolutions. First, you cannot pick anything else than a 4:3 resolution. Resolutions other than 4:3 aspect ratio will cause a constant flickering with DirectVR enabled, and thus the experience will be barely endurable. The second problem arises from the first one. Yes, this game can be forced to use custom resolutions, but when loading in windowed mode, it will readjust the vertical dimension of your custom resolution to your screen's maximum height. For example, if you set 1600 by 1200 but run your monitor at 1920 by 1080, when the game loads, it'll readjust to 1600 by 1080. In theory, this resolution could work, but the flickering issue immediately comes into play since we are not using a 4:3 aspect ratio. It's to be noted that those with a 2K desktop resolution or greater will indeed be able to run this game at 1600 by 1200. If you want to attempt custom resolutions, enter the dimensions as a launch parameter on Steam as follows: -W, then the width, -H, then the height, using all lowercase letters. Notice that here I'm doing this with our motion blur parameter still there. Just add the custom resolution flags after that. Let's go ahead and start our VR runtimes, either SteamVR or Oculus Home, whichever applies. Then let's start VorpX, and finally let's launch Left 4 Dead 2. Make sure you start a single player game the first time you do this. You will need a moment to enter a few settings before you get started, and you don't want to keep any real people waiting. Once you've saved the basic settings, in the future you'll be able to play online, as the only thing you'll need to do is a DirectVR scan from the start and you'll be on your way. Stand amongst your robotic team and hit the delete key to bring up the VorpX HUD. First, under main settings, make sure 3D reconstruction is set to geometry if it isn't already. Next, set 3D separation strength to 0.75. Next, go into image settings. You can leave crystal image on normal or set it to off if you prefer that. Off might even give a little performance boost on the low-end systems. Set game HUD scale to 0.55. You can vary from that a little bit, but below 0.5 things will get hard to read. Set game HUD depth to 0.85 to keep the display depth out of the weapon's way as much as possible. Hop on over to display settings. Make sure that direct mode async render stays on, but set direct mode fluid sync to off if it's not already. You can now head over to the DirectVR section of the settings. Select and hit the button to run a scan. Yes, VorpX has a DirectVR scan hotkey, but I personally avoid using it, as the hotkey often conflicts with a control in the game, or worse, opens a menu which invalidates the DirectVR scan. It's always safest to go through the button. Your scan should succeed, especially if it's the first time you're doing this. After the successful scan, there's 3 things you'll want to change, so hit the delete key again to bring up the VorpX HUD. It's very important to turn off DirectVR positional tracking for this title. Yes, it works, well, sort of, but you'll notice constant flickering. Not as terrible as flickering you get from picking the wrong aspect ratio in your resolution, but intense enough that it will bother you after a while. Having it off eliminates all the flickering. I've configured my player field of view adjustment to -17.0. This gives a good balance in terms of weapon model size, depth, and how much of it obstructs your view. Feel free to vary from that setting if you want. This is entirely a matter of personal preference, but -17 should give you a good starting point. Last but not least, set use cache if possible to off. It's caused me nothing but problems. If for some reason you have a scan fail because you're, for example, you're doing a whole bunch of weird stuff to test the game in order to create a VorpX tutorial, the game will remember this failed scan, and thus will reuse incorrect information every future scan you attempt, resulting in failures over and over. I only had this problem once, and disabling the direct VR cache seems to have done the trick. That's it. Don't forget to hit the OK and save button, and then it's time to get on your way playing Left 4 Dead 2 in some pretty excellent virtual reality. There's only one prominent issue to mention, along with a few weird things that won't really affect gameplay, and those will be covered in the next segment covering notes and known issues. Let's get to the first issue, the only issue that really needs to be pointed out here, that goddamn skybox. The skybox is messed up and there's nothing that can be done about it other than looking away from the nastiness. The only redeeming factor in this situation is that we won't have to deal with the problem constantly. Whenever the action is indoors, and even in some outdoor scenes, the skybox will not be a problem. It's only in about 25% of the places I've been in this game so far that the problem was impossible to ignore. It really gets obvious when you're out in the clear open. The issue resembles a problem with water reflection that I've seen in other games, but this time it's happening in the sky, which is really strange. There's a sort of shadow outline visible in the sky layer. It moves incorrectly as you look around, and these artifacts' left and right perspectives are projected wrong, resulting in an incorrect depth on them. Fortunately, this problem is not always there, and for the most part I didn't notice any of it, or I was able to ignore it for the little time it was in view. Next, a strange but non-major issue is the fact that your rotation and/or position seems to shift when opening the VorpX HUD, and will shift back when you close the HUD. It's the first time I see this behavior in any VorpX-powered game. It doesn't seem to have caused any problems yet. Last, there's the flickering, which we've already covered the causes for. If your entire image is flickering, you're probably not using a 4:3 aspect ratio resolution. Remember that custom resolutions with a height greater than your monitor's resolution will get readjusted by the game and thus cause this problem to arise as well. If you see any weapon flickering, your direct VR positional tracking is set to on. Make sure to turn that off if you want a flicker-free experience. By the way, you might have heard me mention failed direct VR scans in the settings section. If you ever get direct VR scans failing on you, keep in mind you don't only need to restart the game for it to work again, but you also need to restart VorpX. Fortunately, failed scans are very rare. I had to almost force mine to happen. Well, this was fun to make. Really, I started this game once for the settings. I saw it had MSAA, which made things promising. Then I started it a second time in VR with VorpX, and after a quick configuration, I ended up playing for an hour. Normally, I'll try experiments quickly when I start testing a game, but given its pace, this one pulled me in, and for a while it didn't even give me a chance to put it down. Finally, after improving a few things and toying with a few resolutions in preparation for a second session, I played through an entire level and even explored the first part of 2 others out of curiosity. I can't say we're delving into Shadow Warrior 2013 territory. This game's melee is rather unsatisfying and basic compared to that one, but we're definitely entering the electrifying gameplay category. In addition to having the pace, this game has the simplicity. The reason why I jumped in and got yanked into the gameplay so quickly is because of how little time it takes to get into the action. The weapons are simple, The loot is self-explanatory and the mechanics are easy to pick up. If you can take the intense pace and motion you'll be taken through, then you're in for quite an exciting zombie-killing marathon, either by yourself or with friends. From what I've seen so far, this game does right what Serious Sam does wrong. Left 4 Dead 2 has no cheap-ass bullshit blind spot spawns, no absurd uncontrollable hordes. There are some really annoying enemies, but they won't get you killed every 2 microseconds. If you detested Serious Sam like I did, but still want a similar over-the-top shooting experience with inane amounts of enemies swarming at you, Left 4 Dead 2 takes Serious Sam to Horde Combat School, beats it up, and decapitates it. The two are somewhat relatable, and Left 4 Dead 2 wins out big time in any element you can directly compare. The short level nature of Left 4 Dead 2 goes hand in hand with its pace, and for those of you who aren't doing well with the motion in the game, this aspect might be of big help, allowing you to give it a go in short bursts until you get used to it. In my opinion, getting used to the intensity of this game wouldn't only get you fully prepared for even more intense games like Shadow Warrior 2013, but being able to play Left 4 Dead 2 for long periods of time might mean you've reached your maximum tolerance in terms of seated VR. So you can pretty much play anything now. It's time to take this mass zombie killing simulator known as Left 4 Dead 2 through the vScore process. The vScore is a scoring system created to evaluate how well games featured in this series work with VorpX. It's based on 9 criteria, 8 that yield points and 1 that is a penalty value. The criteria are: first, the fixed points values, where a game is given all or nothing for each. Having an acceptable 3D reconstruction method is worth 30 points because no 3D means no depth perception, and then means no VR. Next, proper geometry 3D brings a game to life by providing the only authentic stereoscopic 3D method, so 15 points for that. Geometry 3D works great over here, so a 30 and a 15 for each value respectively. Next, proper head tracking, which is important. Unreliable tracking can destroy a VR experience, is worth 15 points in total. Direct VR is handling the head tracking perfectly in this game, so we've got our 15 points. Second, the variable criteria, where the amount of points can be adjusted for each item. VR requires games running with sufficient field of view, and because of the various ways we can achieve this, some more effective and some less, this is worth up to 15 points. Left 4 Dead 2 gets its field of view from direct VR, so naturally 15 points here as the results are perfect. Proper 3D hands and weapon models are very hard to find in third-party VR. It's quite rare, but it does get a game up to 5 points for getting it right. This game's hand models aren't as bad as, say, Fallout 4's hand models, but there is a depth offset, and to some degree the scale of the hand and weapon models themselves are entirely wrong. 3 out of 5 for this category. With third-party VR, it's hard to come by proper shadows and graphics effects across the board. Dynamic shadows often cause issues, and some effects might render incorrectly. A game can gain up to 5 points based on this aspect. I hesitated a lot here. Everything that could usually be wrong in other games works perfectly here. Shadows? Check. Lights? Check. Fog and atmospheric effects? Check. But it's that skybox. That goddamn skybox shits on the parade. Plus, it's an issue prominent enough that if it's there, it nearly ruins the whole scene. Sad to say, but I can only give Left 4 Dead 2 a 2 out of 5 in this category. A proper user interface and heads-up display means being able to see your health, ammo count, and such. It also means being able to navigate menus. Up to 5 points for how a game handles a heads-up display. I'm impressed here. It's rare that VorpX's HUD scale feature affects even the menu on the title screen, but we've got that here. I wanted to give a 5, but I have to be a little bit careful. Some of the text, as with a lot of other games run through VorpX, can be a bit hard to read. 4 out of 5 seems to be a fair score here because for the most part the user interface gave me no problems whatsoever. It didn't even have any depth offset issues. DirectVR makes the process of setting up a game much easier and often delivers perfect head tracking. Based on how a game supports it, it can get up to 10 points in bonus. DirectVR really works well for this game, but I will take off a couple of points and settle for 8 out of 10. It's a bummer to have to kill off the positional tracking that appears to want to work perfectly, but results in nearly constant flickering. The penalty criteria is here to offset a game's score due to glitches or major issues. Up to 10 points can be withdrawn. I'm slashing off 1 point here for the resolution aspect ratio problem. It happens often that windowed mode causes the game to readjust its resolution on startup, and this game is no exception. Sadly, the adjustment triggers a flicker bug in this case. In the end, Left 4 Dead 2 gets a really good vScore of 91. While this score isn't exceptional for a DirectVR enabled title, it is on the higher end and places this game amongst a group of must-plays for VorpX. It's been on sale lately, and I've noticed that a lot of people own it. If you own VorpX and did not know it supported Left 4 Dead 2, and actually have this game in your library, go give it a shot. It's quite the experience, and given its age, it can be made to run smooth on almost anything, even systems that are under spec. And there you have it, Left 4 Dead 2, our 10th game covered in this series. It was unexpected, but something working with such good results really did have to be covered with priority. As usual, feel free to suggest games you'd like to see us cover in the comments section. We do have a list of our own, but we're always open for extra titles. And that's it for this setup guide. Thanks for watching Stereo 3D Productions. I shall see you next time.